Hello, everyone, and we're live in the latter part of December, or almost the latter part of December, and I have with me the old team of Mr. Delabrock and Mr. G3. For those of you that are not familiar with my regular guests, perhaps G3, or George, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're back again, the three of us. Yeah, that was a good run. I think once the Ukraine-Russo war started. But yeah, I've been a PMC contractor in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Middle East for better part of the last 15 years. I'm on energynewsbeat.com covering a Russian natural gas and geopolitical realignment series of papers, along with a sea power versus land power encirclement strategy slide set that I'm going over with Stuart Turley. So people can find me over there. I was on with Ann Vandersteel a couple of days ago and Constantine Martelli. So those videos should be coming out soon.
Great. And Mr. Delabrock?
Hi, I'm Michael Delabrock. I guess if people haven't somehow come across me on these streams, I'm kind of like just a bit of a news aggregator and a kind of a follower of geopolitical events, giving my analysis and takes on them when and as they happen, mostly with a focus on what happens between Russia and Ukraine. But as of course, with recent events, kind of pivoted to a long-time interest of mine, which was the conflict in Syria, which kind of went quiet for a couple of years and then spectacularly kind of re-erupted again in the last couple of weeks, which has kind of taken my attention in the way that has sort of come to a conclusion of sorts. So hi, that's me.
Okay, excellent. So what we're going to be doing, everybody, today, we're going to be talking not only about the recent events in the Levant and Syria. I myself happen to be in a hotel room in Istanbul, quite close to Syria, but far enough away, so I'm obviously not in any kind of danger. But what we're going to be doing is talking about just the recent events and also perhaps the underlying reasons on the why and the how, and prognosticate perhaps on some of the future and how this will affect the area and perhaps the wider world, and also the entanglement of some of the geopolitical forces that are looking to rub up against each other, as they already are in Ukraine, but now also in this area. So first, I'd like to introduce you to it's a video that George had me take a look at, and it's quite interesting because it's of a Syrian lady and of her dreams being fulfilled. Now it's 5 minutes, so we're not going to watch the whole thing, but we will watch just a part of it. So let me share this with you right now, everybody.
Is the audio on?
Sorry?
Yeah, I'm not getting audio.
I'm not getting audio.
You're not getting the audio. Well, hold on a second. Let me try that again. All right. Sorry, guys. Oops.
I didn't want to interrupt because I assumed the chat must have been getting the audio.
Chat, if you're getting the audio, can you press 1? If you're not getting the audio, press 2, please.
No sound.
All right, hold on a sec.
Yeah, okay. So I wasn't tripping.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to interrupt in case. Oh, okay.
Share audio. Share a tab screen instead. Here we go. Let's try it again. How about now?
have butterflies in my stomach just thinking about it. The last few days have been wild and intense, and we've been glued to the TV just watching the news unfold like everyone else. It was too fast and too scary, but it was also so beautiful to see a dream coming true. For all those decades we've been waiting for this moment. And I think at first it was we were skeptic, we were scared of this new change, but then once we've seen a lot of assurances that things are going into the right direction, we started letting ourselves be happy and enjoy that this is not a dream, this is something that's happening, and that there is finally a possibility to go back home, and which is people are already like going back home. So this is beyond imagination. Like, we couldn't have imagined this. The scary thought that I didn't allow myself to think about all those years, that I kind of gave up at some point, that I'll never be able to go back home. But yes, since the news have erupted and like the regime has fallen, this became a possibility, and we're just waiting for things to get clearer and to get more assurance that we can actually go. Definitely, we're going to visit as soon as possible. I don't know about the long-term plans, if we're going to return there for good or not. But yeah, definitely, I can't wait to visit. I haven't been in Syria since 2012, December. And I look forward to that moment when I open the door of my house there and show my kid. I have a 7-year-old boy who keeps referring to Syria as your country. He calls it my country. It's like he doesn't relate to Syria. He's never seen it. He doesn't know anything about it. And I always shielded him from that dark past. He's convinced he's Irish because he was born in Ireland, and he keeps showing me his Irish passport. And yeah, now he's excited about it, and he wants to see Syria, and he wants to see my home and my college and my friends in Syria. So we definitely look forward to visit as soon as possible. Like my family home, definitely, like my stuff, my books. I left so many things there. I could only leave with 2 bags, and like, how much can you pack in 2 bags, in 2 suitcases?
I carry 2 bags.
There's a lot of
for a year.
Like, we left our memories, we left parts of ourselves there, and reuniting with friends, just sitting there, just sitting together and laughing and joking like old times, catching up. We've been scattered all around the world, so I keep imagining this image of me and my friends just sitting and laughing and talking like there has been no war, like we've never separated or scattered, and meeting with also like our kids, getting them to meet each other. And it would be funny because now many of the Syrians who left Syria have learned another language. Arabic sounds like a second language for them. So it would be funny to see all those kids who are talking in German and in English and in Turkish, and how will they connect with each other? That would be interesting to see. That I used to always hide that I'm from Syria, not because I'm ashamed of it, but because of all the consequences and the follow-up questions that I would get, and because it's a topic that was heavy to talk about in random situations. So, and hence that's the title of my book. But now this suddenly had changed overnight, and I want to talk about home, and I'm proud that I'm from Syria. This negative label and stereotype that followed us for the past decade, that we are refugees, that we are displaced, that people should be sorry for us or should be worried from us, that all has gone overnight. Like, we are free and happy and proud, and it's so good to say that I'm from Syria now. It was a shock. Like, I was sitting on the couch just trying to process that we can finally go home and visit home, that this is actually happening. I kept reading that breaking news line in red saying that the Syrian regime has fallen, and it just took me several minutes to absorb that this has actually happened. This is the line that we've been waiting for 12 or 13 years to happen, and it didn't have to take that long. That time wasted, the souls that were lost in that time. But yeah, it was a joy. So it was early in the morning. So once the sun was out, we went out with friends and we had breakfast, and we were dressing in green, which is the color now of the new Syria. Everyone's dressing green, which ironically I like.
Well, the reason it's green is that's the color of Islam. The same way the Libyan flag was just a clean green flag prior to the fall of.
There's also the flag she's referencing it's actually a colonial flag imposed on Syria by the French.
Oh, even better. I think we're done with her. What I would like to do is talking about this lady first and foremost. Why do you think she's so? Tell me what you guys think. She thinks she's going to be going home, and the millions upon millions upon millions of Syrians living in Western countries are all going to be going home. Do you think this is likely, and what are they to find?
I'll let you go first, George, because
okay, yeah. I mean,
expansive spiel.
I was hesitant to go first because I might just totally lose it with this idiot. I started posting the black flags of the Khorasan series of videos when I was still in Afghanistan, and what the Sunnis have always been trying to do is surround, since 1979, is surround the Shia from the right side, from the west side of Iran, because eventually they want to go through it, because to bring back the Imam Mahdi, either the Sunnis or the Shia have to attack Israel from the north. The Persians, the Iranians, were supporting Hezbollah and had southern Syria and southern Lebanon, so they were meeting the criteria for attacking, the criteria in the Hadiths to attack Israel from the north and bring back the Mahdi. So it's been a race between the Sunni and the Shia. Well, Hezbollah was in the lead, and Western Iran is Western Khorasan, so they could leave from Iran and meet all the criteria. The Sunnis have been trying to play catch up. They've the Saudis, people from the Arabian Peninsula have been pouring billions of dollars into the madrasas and mosques in Pashtun areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan since Zia al-Haq was the leader of Pakistan, in order to the Pashtun are 6 to 9 of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, is what some people argue. So the Arabs think that the Pashtun are the descendants of Abraham that followed the right prophet path, and they're supposed to swing through the Khorasan, attack Israel, and kick out the tribes of Benjamin and Judea who control Israel now. So this level of Shia versus Sunni rivalry is occurring underneath a superpower, sea power versus land power, sea power encirclement versus land power, overland logistical supply route, and maritime mitigation breakout strategies. That's what's occurring. It's following Speakman's Rimland versus Heartland dichotomy. So the West, I think the easiest way to explain it is the Anglosphere, the sea power, controlled the maritime choke points before, during the Cold War. Then as soon as the Cold War ended, there's a big, huge rush for them to cover the riverine choke points and the terrestrial choke points. So they pushed the EU eastward to put tariff trade barriers and non-trade tariff barriers on all Russian goods, with the big focus on natural gas because it's the cheapest form of energy. Then in the Middle East, they want to control, if you put up one of the maps, you can see what the purpose is. They want to control the oil fields and the pipeline routes. So you want to control the land bridge going through the South Caucasus. Turkey, is the Anatolia Peninsula. So you want to control that land bridge going over the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits. I think you're at the Bosphorus Straits now. You also want to control the Middle East because it's the land bridge between the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. And you also want to control, all the maritime choke points, of course. So when you go around that, you got the Kerch Strait and Azov is what they want to control. Both the straits in Turkey, the Suez Canal, they already controlled Gibraltar. You also want to control Strait of Bab el-Mandab in the Sea of Oman. If you go back,
what map are we wanting to look at? What page? Do you remember?
go to 6 is good enough. Yeah. So if what they want to do is they want to control both the oil fields and the supply line routes. So the way you construct, the way you develop proxy wars or color revolutions or regular warfare is you want to foment existing rivalries that are based on ethnic, linguistic, and religious rivalries, and you want to incite them into a riot. So in this case, the major powers have been using the sea of Sunni versus Shia rivalries. And if people want to look up Operation Cyclone between Zbigniew Brzezinski and Stansfield Turner, they'll see what I'm talking about. They've started funding they followed the funding of the people from the Arab Peninsula, heavily supporting General Zia al-Haq to put the Salafi Wahhabi mosques in the Pashtun areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Back then, during the late 70s, early 80s, the idea was to push the atheistic Marxists back out of the Islamic republics in the lower stands. The people questioned whether that was a good idea by Brzezinski, and he said, well, the amount of funding and support we gave those tribes was actually dwarfed by the amount of funding coming from the Arabian Peninsula. But still, it comes down to the special forces training in that area, because all the different groups, Akani Network, the Pashtun, of course, and the different what's become the Uzbekistan Islamic movement, the Turkmenistan Islamic movement, or the Tajikistan Islamic movement, or the East Turkestan Islamic movement in Uyghurs, they were all funded and supported way back then. The time period since, and the reason why I'm explaining this, because the chickens are coming home to roost. The time period since, I'm going to classify this Zbigniew Brzezinski era and the Cold War era as the regime change destabilization period during the global war on terror, GWAT. I'm going to classify that as a regime change nation building experiment, which failed horribly. And then with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, it's a return to Operation Cyclone. It's a return to regime change destabilization, but in this case, the Sunnis, funding the Sunni Pashtun Taliban in Afghanistan and the foreign fighter movements to completely obliterate the boundaries in Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. If you put up the map of the Khorasan up above, I think it's 5.
Okay, 5.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. When the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, the purpose, we left the $80 billion of guns and equipment there. If you watch the Sean Ryan show, it doesn't matter whether it's Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann or Tulsi Gabbard or Joe Kent, these people, except for Tulsi Gabbard, but Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann was Lieutenant Colonel for a Special Forces unit. Joe Kent was a tier 1 operator. These areas. They're very, very confused about the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the support for the ISIS Al-Qaeda. I just call them the Sunni VEOs, because when they're worthy victims, we change the name. And then when they're a terrorist organization, we change the name, but it's the same individuals. So I just call them Sunni violent extremist organizations. And that way you just keep it straight. They can change it from Hat Tahrir al-Sham, from Al-Qaeda or the different ISIS affiliates, but if you group them in there, you can see where they align and where they don't. So right after we withdrew from Afghanistan, I heard from my contacts still in Kabul, because I have tons of coworkers that were still there at the time. They were telling me about the plane loads of cash still landing at Kaya. And I was getting that on the DM. And in December, Lynn O'Donnell of Foreign Policy magazine was talking to, she was talking about on WION about the plane loads of cash. Well, Sean Ryan thought that he broke and that was in, that was in December 22. So Sean Ryan thought that he broke that story a couple of years ago. No, I knew about that all along. They've come up with more exact numbers. He did break that part, but they're still very, very, they don't understand what the purpose was. And the purpose was to get to use the Sunni groups to destabilize as many Russian and Chinese infrastructural projects in Central Asia, and then also try to destabilize Iran, because the way if the neocons can't destabilize Russia and have the natural gas supply lines going north of the Caspian without paying Russia, they want it to go through Iran. They want it to go through south of the Caspian, but Iran is in the way. So they need to destabilize Iran. And you have the Baluch separatist movement in the south, and you have the Azeris in the northeast, and then you have the Kurds just below that bordering Iraq. If you switch over to, let me address it from this angle. When General Wesley Clark in his 2007 series of campaign speeches was talking about the 7 countries in 5 years that the United States was going to invade, keep in mind, Tommy Franks was already in Afghanistan, so it's 8 countries in 5 years. He named the countries in random order, but in geographical order, it's Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. And then in North Africa, it's Libya, Sudan, and then Somalia. The purpose of that is to control both the oil fields and the pipeline routes. So here, they moved NATO east and tried to cut them off from cheap Russian natural gas so the United States wouldn't lose the entire Western Europe as their alliance system. We explained that in the 6 power center theories and my series of videos on Working Brother. So they've cut Russia off from natural gas when they blew up Nord Stream. We covered that. So now they're going to have a tremendous problem of feeding Germany natural gas before it collapses. So what you saw since October 7th of last year is a desperate attempt to take over the Levant oil fields off the coast of, Gaza, Israel, and Lebanon. And then what they've done here is they've really empowered HTS to come down from Idlib. And just keep in mind, how did they get so well stocked of guns and ammo and so well prepared? It could be complete coincidence, but it's about 100 miles to Encircling Air Force Base, and the United States has been sending over massive.
Can you tell for the audience where Incirlik Air Force Base is?
Yeah, it's near Adana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can fly there.
Mm-hmm.
So the that came in.
Just for people who are not aware, Adana is a city in the south of Turkey. People know the map of Turkey, that little bit that goes into Syria. It's in that area, so it's very close to the border of Syria, just to put it into context.
Yeah, so you have the Seyhan, you have Encircling Air Base, and it's right near where the Seyhan refineries and oil and gas terminals are. So when that insurgency happened, some people speculate, I was watching Michael's show and some others, that the aim was just to take over Aleppo and Hama and put more pressure on Assad. But they kept on crumbling, and there's no resistance. So I think it's a screen pass, to use the American football metaphor. They went ahead and just gave up and decided to consolidate. And the reason why that is, if you let HTS take over all of Syria and let them have let the neocons have what they wish for, Well, now Al Qaeda controls the nation state. They have now in a position where they have fulfilled all the Hadith prophecies, because a lot of these fighters, the foreign fighters, are from the Central Asian stance. So now,
oh yeah, that's an interesting point, George. Would you be able to elaborate on that, on how this, as it's called, a civil war, has one side that are Syrians and another side that is filled with foreign fighters from, as you say, many of the stands? I think this is a very important point, because so many people are talking about this as though it is some kind of civil war, when in fact, as you just pointed out, a lot of these fighters are from the central stands, and they're not fighting for Syria or freedom. They're fighting for jihad. I think that's an important point.
Oh yeah. Let me back up. Yeah, I named all the groups before. It's East Turkestan movement, the Tajiki Taliban, different from the Sunni Pashtun Taliban. You have the Chechens showing up. They usually they used to train in Bosnia and then come in, enter the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan. Just tons of reports on that. Lost my place there for a second. But since what they started doing, since they armed these, the people in Idlib, now they've taken over Damascus. I think that's it's a screen pass play, because I was looking to see what Russia was going to do in Latakia and Tarsus rather, because they elected to stay there. All right, all they have to do, and then meanwhile, Israel and the United States has just been trying to bomb the arms depots like crazy all over Syria. Well, they don't want, now that they know Al Qaeda now controls a nation state, they want to neuter it as much as possible. So I think the preconceived play of Putin and Assad was to let them take it and then start arming the hell out of HTS. And now that's Israel's and the United States problem. Because if you look where the United States holds the northwestern parts of Syria and where the Kurds are, and along the Euphrates River from Al-Tanf Air Base up to Deir ez-Zor. That's where all the different tier 1 and tier units are. So now Israel has to come up. If you go to the greater Israel map too, that's a good one to look at.
Hold on a sec. I have to collect that. Let me just let me collect that. Keep talking, please.
So Israel now has to move up there, and of course the Druze are inviting them up to take over that area of southern Syria, because now they need to increase their buffer zone. But by increasing their buffer zone and giving the Druze, supporting the Druze so they won't get annihilated by Al Qaeda, it covers their plan of expanding greater Israel, but also it's nothing but desert from there up to the Euphrates River. So are they going to move all the way up to the Euphrates River and join forces with the American soft units that are up there? If they do that, then the United States and Israel will have taken over half of Syria. It will be very interesting because, just playing devil's advocate here, if I were Putin, I would just arm the hell out of HTS and just let them go at it.
This is an important point about Israel and October 7th. Since the beginning, it started off very interestingly in the fact that Mossad, supposedly being one of the most efficient intelligence service in the world, somehow didn't see this coming, even though they were given forewarning by, I believe it was Egypt and Jordan. And since then, they've pretty much reduced Gaza to rubble. They've destroyed Hezbollah. They've almost completely neutered both Hamas and now Iran. And the corridor to Lebanon and Hezbollah via Syria has now been it's been shut down. How is this? Oh, well, and I should also bring up the fact that they've taken over the entirety of the Golan Heights, and they're creating what they're calling a sterile zone. So they're now are taking over territory in Syria proper. And what I find interesting is the jihadists in Syria proper who have taken control of the country. They have already said that they have bigger fish to fry, and they're not concerned about Israel and its move against their territory. How would you describe this? Either of you want to jump in on that?
Oh, yeah, I can continue. I mean, the reason why I think it collapsed, the United States already had their oil supplies and strangling the economy. Most of their agricultural supplies are up near Turkey or along the coast. So you're literally starving the country. So I think I think Assad already made the idea to go ahead and abandon it. And then, so now the new government has to come in under the same circumstances. So now what are they going to do? Because the Western media has actually whitewashed them and said, oh, HTS, has liberated Syria. Okay, well, if they've liberated Syria, then the Turks should be moving out of their bigger agricultural areas up north, and some down south by Damascus. And then the U.S. should be moving out of the Euphrates River and where the oil fields are, where the Kurds are. So somehow I seriously doubt that's going to happen. So now how is this new government going to survive being strangled so badly?
Well, also, are they not attacking not only naval forces of Syria? They're bombarding all manner of military targets, but also infrastructure in order to neuter this new caliphate, as you will. And who benefits from this other than the usual suspects?
Yeah, it gets very tricky because Turkey's strategic plans, it would like to retake over as much of the Ottoman Empire as it can. But its main plan has been a pan-Turkic plan, which really revolves around the Trans-Caspian Sea pipeline, or because they want to unite the Turkic tribes, which are in the Central Asian stance. Well, one way to do that is if Iran is destabilized. So in a lot of ways, their interests align with the neocons of wanting to destabilize Iran so you can have access to the Caspian Sea oil and gas fields. If you want to go down to, which slide is it? Oh, slide 17. Slide 17.
Yeah.
Just so people can see what the goal lines are.
Yeah, doing it right now.
Okay, so one way that if Iran were going to splinter along its different ethnic groups, that would also, that would allow the neocons to run natural gas pipelines and support Western Europe. That would all be controlled by Western, big oil companies. So the money would go right back into the city of London and Wall Street and Switzerland, of course. So with Erdogan and Aliyev, they've really wanted to get rid of Armenia, and they really want to get rid of the Kurds. So now is Turkey going to make a stronger movement to get rid of Armenia and the Kurds? But the problem with that is the U.S. still has personnel in Kurdistan, Iraq, and where the YPG is in northeastern Syria. So is there going to be, there's so many areas for conflict now that HTS has taken over Syria, that it would be, again, I go back to Russia did not leave its bases in Latakia and Tartus. So I'm just going to make a really super wild guess in that Putin already sent his envoys to the different GCC countries and just told them, just start resupplying HTS when they take over with all the weapons and ammunition they need. And when I talk about the different GCC countries, I want to exclude the House of Saud, because the aim of ISIS and Al Qaeda. Let me put it this way: the first, when Muhammad died, the first 4 caliphs were elected by the imams right around Muhammad. It set the precedent where the imams elect a supreme leader. So all Western forms of government are illegitimate in the eyes of Islam, and all family dynasties are illegitimate in the eyes of Islam. It has to be a caliph, elected by the imams in Mecca. So do these same Arab oil sheiks also support HTS? It would be the same family lineage that was behind the attempted assassination attempt of Mohammed bin Salman in Las Vegas several years ago, which is what that shooting was all about. And it's the same family lineages that have been funding the Pashtun Taliban since the 70s and building the radical madrasas in that whole Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, because they've turned it from the moderate Sufi and Hanafi forms of Islam to Salafi Wahhabism. And just to make a point, I was having this discussion back in end of 2012, beginning of 2013 with some friends of mine on LinkedIn. And we were discussing whether the Free Syrian Army existed anymore at that time. It's this ISIS and Al Qaeda in Iraq Al Qaeda in Iraq became ISIL and ISIS and IS. Well, it was how they're getting funded and supported tells itself, because it was reported that they're selling oil to Syria. Well, if you're taking truckloads of crude oil, you can only take it to a refinery. First of all, you have to get it across the checkpoints in Turkey. So you have to own trucking companies, and you need state-sponsored cooperation to get it across the border. Then you take it to the refineries. You have to have a business relationship to the refineries. You refine it, you put it on ocean-going ships and send it to a market. So you have to have access to ocean-going ships. Then you have to go sell it. So you have to have relationships with major wholesale buyers in the West. Then you have to transfer that into petrodollars, typically. And then you have to buy guns and ammo in huge scale. Long War Journal was saying that the war in Syria is $10 million a day. Sometimes, some estimate of maybe 12 million a day. So then you're bringing trainloads of ammo from wherever they're bringing it to, and then you're bringing it back through the port of Ceyhan, trucking it back down through to the Turkish border. Again, you need trucking companies to do that. So if you just count each one of those steps, how much state actor complicity is there involved? Okay. 2, who would be supporting Sunni violent extremist groups other than Sunni violent, Sunni Arabs? And where would that come? And you're right back to the oil sheiks of the Arabian Peninsula. So this has been well known to the to the intelligence community ever since it started. So it's impossible to say that they weren't behind it. So this has been going on for a long time, and of course the motive is the sea power encirclement, 5 power center doctrine strategy to choke off Russia, to keep it from selling its goods and rebuilding its armies. DW documentary series has done a handful of videos on that. So now they have Al Qaeda and it controls the nation state. Now what's next? I think China, the play for China and Russia is to make it go out of control, because turnabout is fair play. The Western powers did it to them. They can do it back, and we'll see what the actors are.
Yeah. Now, maybe either of you can answer this question. What are your thoughts on how Israel is making out from all of this chaos in the region? Because I see them as the big winner. They've neutralized Hamas. They've obliterated Gaza. There's talk about basically most of the Gazan population settled in Western countries, and Gaza being fully annexed. They've eliminated Hamas for the most part, Hezbollah. They've neutered Iran, and now they've carved up Syria and put in an Islamic caliphate, and are at the moment, along with their greatest ally. I'm not sure which is the tail and which is the dog, and which one's wagging which, with the United States, who's the client state and who's the hegemon here. How do you, either of you, maybe Michael, what do you see vis-a-vis the outcome for Israel in this?
Oh, kind of jumping ahead. I was hoping to comment on the starting video, but I guess yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's comment on the.
Oh, no. I'll deal with not to break up the flow of the conversation. I think this is more or less the culmination of a complete Israeli strategic victory across the entire region. I think one by one, Israel has more or less established complete military dominance across the region. You've got the diplomatic process of normalization with various Arab states, which kind of was thrown a hick because of events in Gaza and what we've seen there. And because we are on YouTube, I can't really comment too much on what occurred there. But Israel pretty much knocked Hamas completely out of the map. It's doubtful Hamas will ever reclaim any sort of capability it used to have. Then, of course, in more recent times, the Israelis have gone into Hezbollah. And then its war and invasion of southern Lebanon, I think, has played a very large role in what we've seen in Syria for a number of reasons, namely because Hezbollah provided a significant amount of armed manpower that used to assist and prop up the Assad regime in Syria during the civil war. Obviously, if Hezbollah has been effectively decimated as a fighting force by the Israelis, that force there is still fighting ongoing in Lebanon, despite these fig leaves of various proposed ceasefires, which never really seemed to come to fruition. Hezbollah was effectively completely more or less out of the picture in terms of events in Syria, which significantly handicapped the Damascus government. So Israel has more or less won a de facto military victory over Hezbollah, but with the collapse of Syria, because Syria was a central element of Iranian strategic foreign policy, for what is, I'm sure various people in your community will be aware and have seen various references to what's called the axis of resistance. The axis of resistance is this Iranian concept of power, geopolitical power, and efforts to cultivate a aligned group of state and non-state actors in opposition to Israel and also the United States and Western powers as well. But certainly Israel is the main geopolitical focus of the axis of resistance. Yeah, that map there would probably be a good way to articulate it, even if it's on a different subject. So obviously you have Iran in the east, the world's premier Shia power, a revolutionary Islamic theocracy. It's the axis of resistance also includes Hamas, or did include Hamas. It's doubtful about just how much in existence that organization still is. Hamas in Gaza, which formed the western flank of the axis of resistance. Then you had Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah was armed and got a significant amount of its funding and its military supply via Syria, via the Bashar government. So Syria was kind of like the bridge between Iran via its militias, aligned militias in Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Units and groups like that, to transport fund Hezbollah and build up Hezbollah is what was perceived to be a credible military threat to Israel. With Syria now effectively out of the mix, completely knocked out and under the stewardship of a nominally Islamist Sunni faction, the regards Shia, the Shias, the Ismailis, the Alawites, and Shia Iran as its primary enemy, threat to its rule, as opposed to Israel, despite the fact that Israel is openly invading across the Golan and is 18 miles from Damascus as we speak. The new authority in Syria seems to very much be of the authority in Damascus, because there's a number of competing authorities as such in Syria at this stage. You have the Turkish aligned Syrian National Army in the north, which is fighting with the Kurds, and then you've got the Kurds fighting potentially with elements of Hurriyat al-Sham and the Islamist coalition arrayed around that. But nonetheless, the authority in Damascus, which appears to be establishing itself as the de facto national authority, has made it seemingly very explicit that Shia, it regards the Shias and Shia Iran as its chief political enemy and military threat, as opposed to Israel. So the likelihood that anything even approaching a fraction of the support that used to go from Iran to Hezbollah in the future seems to be very much in doubt. So this leaves the axis of resistance effectively with a neutered, decimated Hezbollah, which is questionable just how its existence can go forward. Iran itself and the Houthis in Yemen. So in terms of Israeli perceptions, it's just been complete strategic victory, non-stop, effectively since October 7th last year. It's knocked Hamas pretty much off the map. It can effectively dictate what will and is happening in Gaza, in the West Bank, despite any protestations by foreign powers. As long as that American veto, even as critical as Joe Biden was, I mean, it should be said that as much as we all hate Joe Biden, as he started to become increasingly critical towards Israel, threatening to withhold weapon supplies and the like, but ultimately he, because of the stranglehold that American Israeli influence has in American politics, it ultimately resulted in hollow words and never came to actual concrete action. So in effect, Israel is determining what will happen in the West Bank and in Gaza. So I think we're going to see probably again, because we're on YouTube, I need to watch what I say here. I think we'll see a more colonization of the West Bank and the dispossession of the indigenous population there. I think the population in Gaza is effectively written off. A quote that I've seen is, with the loss of Syria, that Palestine has effectively been lost in terms of the battle for that. Because with this loss of direct support that was coming through Syria into Lebanon to support Hezbollah, it is questionable just how much, especially, it should not be stated just how bad a beating that Hezbollah has taken over the past couple of months. You've had the death of Nasrallah. Most of the senior leadership was killed through airstrikes, through the infamous pager and walkie-talkie bombings. Hezbollah has been effectively decimated as a fighting force. Its influence in Lebanese politics is potentially going to take a significant hit now as well. So Hezbollah, this kind of quasi-state within a state, this sort of alternative entity within Lebanon that was built around Hezbollah, the viability of that going forward is potentially of significant doubt. So in effect, the only real opposition that Israel is really going to be facing going forward, if at all, will be from Iran and from the Houthis. And we've not really seen much. Like in terms, it was quite extraordinary to see it, and it was very high profile and made for great videos. But the massive missile barrage that Iran dealt against Israel seemed to have resulted in very little, if any, actual long-lasting damage to the Israelis. Whereas the Israelis have effectively, over the past year, just completely decimated the Iranian sphere of influence across the Middle East. It's openly bombed Iran numerous times, and with the loss of Syria as well, another aspect of it is, while it never really seemed to have been effective while it was there, is that the Syrian Arab Army and its air defense network did act as a sort of potential block of sorts, especially whenever the Russians decided to assist it, if they had a common interest in doing that. Russian air defense sites in Syria. Syria sort of acted as a block for the Israeli Air Force, potentially bombing Iran. Now that the Syrian Arab state itself is gone, and the Israelis have effectively completely wiped out the old air defense infrastructure that used to exist there. Just looking at this map, Yeah, they kind of always had flight rights over Jordan, and the Jordanians were never really going to stop the Israelis from using their airspace to strike Iran. But it should just be looked at how close the eastern extremities of Syrian airspace is, just across a short bit of, in relative terms, airspace of Iraq before they enter Iran, and not just enter Iran, actually enter the sort of populated and military strategic parts of Iran, the mountainous territory which the Israelis could use to hide from radar if they fly low and the like, and hit targets around Tehran. So in terms of Israel, unmitigated, complete and total strategic victory. And I'm saying this as someone who's not exactly the best friend of Israel, is a big supporter of it. So do take it with a pinch of salt. I'm just kind of laying it out as it is. This year has been just a complete and total victory for Iran, for Israel, and for Netanyahu. So that's kind of my spiel on the Israeli questions. In terms of other ways, I could probably be here for another hour going over how this affects the Russians. The Turks are ultimately the biggest culprit behind all of this. I think they're far more culpable for what's happened in Syria than the Israelis, the Americans, or any other power, more than most. But in terms of the Israeli aspect, yeah, Tel Aviv has and is celebrating at the moment, and they will be celebrating into the near future. It's debatable just how far the IDF is going to go in Syria. They've pretty much taken all of the Syrian Golan. And as we see what happened with what is now the Israeli Golan, which was illegally annexed, the Syrians will probably lose their part of the Golan. And it's potentially the Israelis seem to have pretensions about pushing into, as George mentioned earlier on, the Jabal el-Druz area in the south. They've taken Mount Hermon, and it seems that they're pushing up the eastern borders of Lebanon, potentially with the aspect of just completely outflanking the Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon, and potentially enter Lebanon in a future military campaign from the east, from what is de facto Syria, to completely wipe out Hezbollah, as well as in the same fashion they've done with Hamas. So it's kind of my meandering spiel on the Israeli aspect of this.
Could you give just a very quick spiel on what you see as the interconnected tissue between this regional conflagration and what's happening in Ukraine?
Numerous ways. I'm trying to think of a way to keep it short, because I could be here for hours talking about it. But in terms of, I think in the way that the collapse of Afghanistan precipitated the war in Ukraine, I think the war in Ukraine has precipitated what's happened in Syria. The way I view it at this stage, at least one aspect of it is a significant pillar that kept the Assad government in power and helped win, quote unquote, win the war leading up to the 2020 Astana Accords, was the Russian military intervention. This was in form of ground troops. This is where Wagner certainly made its name, through the intervention personally directed by Dmitry Utkin, Mr. Wagner himself. In the battles around Palmyra, along supporting the Hezbollah, certain loyalist elements of the Syrian militia in securing other parts of the country, the projection of power in terms of the airbase at Khamin and the sustaining of the Russian naval port at Tartarus. So the Russians have had a very large military presence in Syria. In my sort of conception is, I actually think that the intervention in Syria was the attempt by Moscow and Russia to reestablish itself in a sort of global power mold. I see this as kind of like, so during the Cold War, you had the Soviet Union and the United States had its various client states that would become under the influence of a various country, and that country was normally required to defend them. Obviously, the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia wasn't able to sustain that. I view what the Russian operations in Syria as the Russian attempt to reestablish that, to establish itself as a global power, and to signal to other countries around the world that, look, what we did in Syria, we could potentially do to you. This was a government that was under attack from domestic enemies in terms of the civil war, but also international enemies in terms of the United States, potentially the Turks. And we came in and we saved and stabilized this country. Obviously, that has kind of collapsed now. So the Russian pretensions there have potentially died with it. That's a debate still to be seen in terms of what happens with the airbase at Khamin and at Tartarus. But how the Ukraine war especially comes into it is, so you have this Syrian economy, and it could be, I've done streams on this. If people want to go and see me articulating what happened with this Syrian economy post 2020, I recommend you go to my channel to check those out. To keep it brief, the Syrian economy effectively collapsed through the civil war, and any attempts at economic rejuvenation were hobbled by the fact that the majority of the oil-producing elements were held by the Kurds, supported by the Americans, and the agricultural base was mostly based up around the Idlib, the Garb plain, which stretches from Idlib down towards Lebanon. Well, half of that was under occupation by this jihadist entity around Idlib, mostly led by Hariyat al-Sham, HTS, but also a numerous other coalition of jihadists. And the other half of this agricultural plain was shattered by the war. So even agricultural products, the Syrian government couldn't really rely on that for much state income, added to the fact that Syria was completely crippled by sanctions. While there was normalization with various Arab states over the number of years after it appeared that Bashar al-Assad effectively had won the war, it was always undermined by the fact that the United States and the EU had effectively sanctioned Syria out of the market. So there was very little way for the economy in Syria to sustain itself. They got into things like state-running drug production and stuff like this, but most of it came via Russian aid from 2018 onwards. So a lot of the energy that sustained the Syrian power system and rebuilding aid came from Moscow. Well, 2022 happens, the war in Ukraine starts, and the Turks invoke the Montreux Convention, which blocks the Bosphorus to the shipping, mostly military shipping, but extended to military adjacent shipping. It was blocked from using the Black Sea via the Bosphorus. Well, if you look at the map here, you can see that Syria obviously does not have any land border with Russia. So how is the way that Russia sustains its military intervention in Syria and also supplies in bulk goods and imports and exports to Syria? It was via the Black Sea, via shipping. Well, the Russians haven't exactly had a very good time in Ukraine, so the Black Sea is effectively completely out of use to Russian naval and logistic shipping to Syria. So 2022 comes, the Syrian economy takes an even bigger hit because of the loss of this direct Russian link. There's still the air bridge that goes forward, but you can only sustain so much via an air bridge, and it's extremely expensive. So the already weak Syrian economy gets even weaker, but the Russians still have a significant amount of military stock in Syria. And then the Ukrainians, especially the SBU and the Ukrainian GRU, start to expand the war in Ukraine in global scales. So this is where you see Ukrainian special forces start operating in Sudan. Ukrainian advisors and special operators start to go to support the Tuaregs in the Sahel, places where Russian PMCs and Russian interests are active. Ukrainians turn up. So this year, September, I believe it was this year, is the Ukrainians pretty much openly admit that they conducted a drone strike against a Russian S-400 strategic air defense battery in eastern Aleppo in Syria. And so you have the Ukrainians starting to enter the mix here. I think people tend to emphasize in recent days just how big the Ukrainian efforts here might have been. But it has been officially confirmed that the Ukrainians did send something up to like 20 FPV drone, what's the right term, operators from the Ukrainian front to train up and to teach Hariyat al-Sham and the various jihadist groups in Idlib how to properly use drones. And it seems that these operators were directly involved, as in it was the Ukrainian operators alongside the jihadists that they trained, were directly controlling these drones in the initial stages of the offensive in Aleppo, and they used that to break some of the more capable Syrian Arab army units that attempted to stand and fight. I believe the big example is around the town of Sakarib, where the Syrian 25th Special Forces Division stood and fought quite valiantly for a number of days before they ended up having to retreat. The Ukrainians are said to have been especially active there, attacking this capable Syrian army unit. So it does appear that Ukrainians have openly admitted to a large degree, because this was a story in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. One of those two ran the story. So so you do have the Ukrainian element as well that's coming into this as part of the wider Ukrainian effort to just fight Russia on every front that it can. And in terms of like the Ukraine aspect of it, it's been stunningly successful. This is, like I say, Syria was kind of the pretensions of Russia trying to reestablish itself as a global power that could have and protect aligned states. Well, that has been shown to have completely collapsed over the past week. So, and for the added effect of potentially just 20 drone operators having a strong hand potentially to have affected that. I think this has been a very good result for the Ukrainians. So I think that's kind of the Ukrainian military aspect of this, how the war in Ukraine has also filtered out into this. But in terms of longer term aspects, I am very fearful of the idea that if people follow the war in Ukraine, you'll almost certainly have seen the footage of these drone videos being used to great effect on both sides against individuals, against military assets. The idea that some professional Ukrainian drone operators have been teaching that to fanatical jihadist Salafist Sunni extremists, to me sounds like that is a massive problem that sooner or later is going to blow up in quite a lot of people's faces. So that's another aspect as well that causes concern for me. So while I think this isn't a major story in the war in Ukraine, it is an example of how the war in Ukraine has made itself felt further afield, and potentially it's hard to quantify because I don't, in terms of like the collapse in Afghanistan, it was big, it was dramatic, it changed the global dynamic, and I do believe that the war in Ukraine is a direct result of the war in Afghanistan and the way it ended. But in terms of like the tangible effects of it, I do think that what's happened in Syria has the potential to be far more influential as opposed to Afghanistan. Because I mean, like Afghanistan, whenever you conceive of it geopolitically, it's kind of out of the way. It's at the bottom of Central Asia. It's between like the unpopulated part of China, nestled between Pakistan and Iran. It does have significant geostrategic value, but compared to Syria, Syria is effectively on the doorsteps of what many would consider Europe, right next to Turkey, in the middle of one of the world's largest oil producing regions, at the heart of effectively Christianity and the Islamic faith. This isn't some out of the way country that has now fallen to a radical jihadist Salafist entity that's taken power. It's in the heart of the Middle East. So if I was in Iraq, if I was in Jordan, if I was in any other Arab state in the country, in the region, I'd be looking on with this with great trepidation about what this means to either the local secular government vis-a-vis like Egypt, in Iraq, or even the monarchies in the Gulf, the Saudis, the United Arab Emirates, and the Jordanians that have this radical entity just to their north. So this is why I think in the final couple of weeks, as the collapse was going on, why I think a lot of Middle Eastern governments actually came out in support of Bashar al-Assad and said that they would prefer him to this coalition around Tahrir al-Sham, because the Syrian Arab Republic is, you kind of knew what you were dealing with. Yeah, it's a pan-Arabist state, but it kind of really isn't. And you know what it is. It's kind of hobbled because of the civil war, but now it's been replaced by this potentially radical jihadist exporting entity that could cause a significant amount of trouble. Kind of feeding it in, I was kind of looking to include this is to my response to the video at the start. But another thing that's happening as well in terms of like how this could affect the wider region is Western media is portraying this government as, this woman that we played at the start, she looked to have been fairly well educated, isn't wearing the hijab. She could be a Christian, though it's unlikely. She struck me as like a very middle class intelligentsia kind of group within Syrian society before she fled. Probably a university student, got involved with protests back at the civil uprising, and that's why she ended up having to leave Syria. And she has these protestations about coming back to see the free Syria.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that for a second and get also George's impression after you, Michael. What do you think about this? These people expressing their, for example, I've seen across Europe, I've seen these parades of jubilation about the fall of the Assad regime. And I think a lot of Europeans would be very happy if these Syrians went home. And a lot of these Syrians are, yes, this is the greatest thing. Now, with the fall of the Assad regime, I think it's Germany, the UK. There's at least a half a dozen countries.
Pretty much most countries in Western Europe have done it. Have put an official pause.
Yeah, put an official pause on any kind of refugee status for the Ukrainian people. Now, what do you guys think about this? These people that are celebrating this and the eventual outcome of this regime and how it's going to play out.
I want to cover that Syrian girl aspect of it real quick, if I can, or maybe not real quick, but as quick as we can. Back in, what was it, 2018, 2019, Al Jazeera had a show after, 20 years on after the Iranian Revolution. And they had 4, at that point, middle-aged women on. And they were talking about how they were really for, they were protesting in Tehran at the time against the Shah of Iran, and they were talking about it was such a great time, and the religious fundamentalists were there, and they were taking down, the Pahlavi government. And then she said, as soon as the Shah abdicated and they took over Iran, she was shocked that the religious fundamentalists were so much more brutal than the Shah. Then at this point, the women live in Sweden, they live in France. And I just have to think, I just couldn't help but to think, just what a bunch of absolute complete ditzes. And so it's just the parallels between those ditzes and this ditz here is so strong. If I had enough money, I would buy her plane tickets back to Damascus ASAP, along with any of our other friends. If you want to move somebody from being, completely delusional blue-pilled to red-pilled or black-pilled, I think about a month would take it. I would pretty much solve that problem.
How about you, Michael?
Well, as I say, I don't know this lady. I don't know her backstory, so I'm just going off what's presented in this video. But like I say, she's not wearing a hijab. She's very well English spoken. So to me, this strikes as like I was saying, probably a university student whenever the quote-unquote revolution started, probably got involved thinking she was helping bring in democracy and civil rights and the like. And then I had to flee the country because, as much as we might have all sympathized with Bashar al-Assad, it's not forget it was an authoritarian government. It didn't allow political dissent. So, but it should
be noted that he did provide protection for religious minorities.
Oh yeah. This is why I would, sympathized with the regime, and why ultimately, whenever push came to shove, I would have said the
Assad regime would be preferable to a jihadist regime.
And I think it's playing out on the streets as we see now. But I'll get into that in a second. But like I say, just looking at this lady, I would say she's naive. I'm not going to go into the insulting her and stuff. She's fled the country for whatever reasons. Strikes me as probably from a well-off background, fairly high educated. So I reckon she probably actually ended up having to leave something, as opposed to like these illiterate, people from God knows where who turn up claiming to be refugees. I get the sense that she probably had something that she left, and she was probably quite hurt by it. So I do think she has lost something through this. So I do think she's probably feeling a sense of like genuine elation, like, this thing that caused me to leave my homeland is now gone. But I do think at the same time she's quite naive, potentially, when she goes back. Well, she said she has an Irish son, so she's never going back. She's got a life.
And Ireland has a very, very luxuriant social welfare system, as do a lot of the Western European countries,
I don't think she's ever of the mindset that she is going to go back and live in Damascus and she's going to go back and help build Syria. I think it's going to be like, going back to visit family kind of situation. So I don't think there's a naivety and a detachment that she has, as opposed to what we've started to see since the effective collapse of the Ba'athist state is in my view, from what I've seen, and maybe it's because I'm plugged into a lot of what used to be pro-army accounts, pro-Assad accounts, and Christians and Alawite accounts that are across X and Telegram that are reporting on this stuff. So maybe I'm in an echo chamber, but to me, like, the worst that we expected to happen is starting to happen. It should be said with the caveat that Tahrir al-Sham, the main group which Jolani is a part of, it seems to be more organized and somewhat has discipline to it. But again, Tahrir al-Sham wasn't the only group a part of this like Idlib jihadist entity that is spilled out across Syria. As mentioned earlier, you have the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. You have Ichikarians. These are Chechen diaspora, some of whom were fighting in Ukraine as early as this summer, have been visually documented now fighting in Syria. You have Uyghurs. You have Albanians. You have British jihadis. You have all these other groups that are various Salafist jihadist groups who are far less disciplined. And this is not me trying to run or glaze Jolani and HTS. This is just from what I've seen. These groups are currently running amok across Homs and the coastal regions. I mean, without putting it too blunt, I've seen atrocities started to happen. There's ample videos of people accused of being Alawites or former soldiers, former Syrian army soldiers who are being executed on the spot. There's videos of the desecration of the mausoleum of Hafez al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father, and the person who established the former Ba'athist state in Syria, which, you know, the desecration of a dictator's tomb is one thing, but then it's also held in high regard by the local Alawite community. There's significant concern amongst the Alawites, who are mostly arrayed along the coast, where these non-Arab speaking, often Central Asian state jihadists are moving into the areas and starting to effectively oppress them, murder some of them, engage in looting. After the Israeli bombing of what was the Syrian Navy in Tartus, apparently a group from Uzbekistan began looting the local area and predating on the local Alawite population. The stories coming out of the Valley of the Christians are especially concerning. There's reports that local Christian farmers are effectively being beaten up in their fields and told that you need to go to Beirut now. The local patriarchs, local Christian fathers, the heads of the local Syriac churches and stuff are ringing alarm bells about what's happening. That churches are being looted and desecrated, that they're being told that there are now curfews for Christians. Christian women in Damascus are being told, why aren't you wearing the hijab? Or if you aren't wearing the hijab, you're signaling that you're basically open to be raped, for lack of a better term, you know, trying to keep within the YouTube exactly. guidelines here. So and then there's this adage that was played, like, sort of emerged, especially during the Civil War in general. This is back in like your 2014, 2018, whenever it was very much the Syrian government against Al-Qaeda and that sort of perception period, and ISIS. The phrase Alawites to the coffin and Christians to Beirut kind of thing, that apparently is starting to come back in a big way, which, you know, I'm not too sure if that needs much explanation, but the Alawites have nowhere really to go. This is their homeland. Alawites being sort of like a sect of Shia Islam. Obviously, Sunnis don't like Shias very much. You've got the Ismaili community that are also a sect of Shia Islam in Homs that are also apparently starting to become under oppression by various groups. So this term, Alawites to the coffin, Shia Christians to Beirut, you know, it's effectively advocating the extermination of the Alawite people, and all the Christians in Syria better pack up and go to Lebanon because they have no future in Syria. And it should be said, like, at the start of the Civil War, there was around about 2 million Christians, and add to this the Alawites and the Ismailis and the other ethnic and religious groups in Syria. Now there's potentially around about 500,000 of them at least left in Syria. So, you know, that's almost 3/4 of the Christian population in Syria gone. And, you know, and it should be said, like, this is Syria. This is the Christians and the Alawites and stuff, like, they aren't Arabs who converted to Christianity. Some of them are, a lot of them are Arabs, but these are people who were Christian before Islam came to Syria. a lot of these communities, or like in terms of like the Alawites, this is where they found their ethnogenesis. They are the indigenous people to this land. In the east, you have the Syrian Christians who were effectively almost wiped out completely by ISIS. Those are the actual like genuine, the Assyrians themselves are the descendants of like the Babylonians, the old Semitic peoples before the Arabs came to the region. So you're talking about like indigenous peoples, people who have been there in terms of like the Christians from the age of Christ, like the only still Aramaic speaking villages.
Well, it's interesting because on the road to Damascus is where pretty much the progenitor of the Christian religion found
Saul
his
of
way.
Tarsus, the Damascene conversion.
Exactly, Saul of Tarsus. And also there's the fact that Syria and Damascus, as I've read, is the longest continually inhabited city on the planet. So, for example, somebody would say, well, Jerusalem was sacked and destroyed by the Romans, and for a time there wasn't very much going on there. Like Damascus is not just one of the oldest cities in the world; it's the most continuously inhabited city that we know of. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just it's something that people don't understand. For example, especially in the United States, when they just support, for example, anything that benefits the state of Israel vis-a-vis the breakup of Syria, they don't realize that a lot of these people are not just Islamic people. There's also a lot of Christian people there as well.
Yeah, and the most heartbreaking things that I've seen, and a lot of this came out in the Iraq War, especially. A lot of Iraqi Christians, while they still existed in Iraq, were saying the same things. But like I've been sharing them into my Telegram group, some of these things where there's just videos of Syrian Christians who are just aghast how these evangelical Americans who claim to be like fervent Christians support Israel and various policies in the Middle East that are leading to the effective extermination of the world's oldest Christian communities. These people who have been there since they, like the ancestors of these people, like with no, it's not hyperbole. Like these were the people, their ancestors were potentially converted directly by Christ or by Saul of Tarsus. These are, like I say, the only still Aramaic speaking populations as their first language are in Syria. And you've got the Assyrian Christians in the east of Syria who are potentially looking at another extermination that's going to happen upon their people. And the Assyrians are like the descendants of the ancient Assyrian people, hence the name. These are the people who stretch back to Babylon, to the pre-Arab, way before Islam was a thing, way before Christianity is a thing, like the actual indigenous people of these lands, who most of them tended to end up converting to Christianity and holding on to that Christianity through
holding on to the Christianity through the waves of Muslim invasion and conversion is something to absolutely take into account.
Yeah, and now they're potentially about to effectively see the end of their history because of, well, in a roundabout way, American foreign policy is the heart of this, the foolish endeavors in Iraq and stuff. But then how Israel plays into this and how the Americans effectively give especially like the evangelical American who are like, we are evangelical, massive fans of Israel because, divine intervention and Jesus will come back and Israel's the chosen people. But yet their policies are effectively, the things that they're advocating for are effectively like wiping out the world's oldest Christian communities. It's quite tragic. And like I say, and it should be said that my personal sort of sympathy with Bashar al-Assad came from his adage that he, the Ba'athist state that he held did guarantee a future of sorts for these minorities. And also it was a Syria that was modern in a sense, like but it was an oppressive Syria. Like if you engaged in political discourse against the government, it was bad news for you. But if you weren't political, you could have a fairly westernized life. Like I was looking at some of the, again, looking back through, it's kind of weird to do it. You look at some of these old pro-government Syrian accounts and you go back less than 3 weeks ago and they're posting footages of like a an electronic rave in Damascus, or they're posting footage of one I seen was like the Syrian version of like the Tour de France, a bicycle race with all these people who wouldn't look out of place. Kind of wouldn't look out of place apart from the ethnic adage, but in France in the modern day. But it was effectively like the Syrian Tour de France along the coastal routes in Syria. And it's just weird looking at this, and you're like, well, this state doesn't exist. This way of life is no longer there. This fairly Western looking life that was opposed by pretty much the entire West, which went out of its way to destroy itself, to destroy this entity that sort of provided this way of life, is gone now. And I'm just thinking about these people. Like I say, the footage of these young Syrians in Damascus going to this rave like 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, they were doing that. Can they do that anymore? What happens if they do that anymore? Is there a future for none of them were wearing, there was a couple who were wearing hijab. So I assume like most of them must have been like very secular Sunnis, maybe some Christians, or just not really religious as well. They were just young people who were going out to enjoy a night in a city that was effectively devastated by war 3 weeks ago. But now that's gone. What is the future for these people? That way of life is gone. The way of life for the Christians, and it's a very strange feeling to look at this stuff that is so close. Like literally a couple weeks ago, this was happening, and now it's gone, potentially forever. Is that these people, the way of life they had, their communities, their ancient communities that they have, is just potentially gone, largely down to frankly, I think it's the Turks who are behind this. I think this is Erdogan's machinations more than anything. I think there's been input by other powers, but I think this is an atrocity that we will come to rule the day of. And I think people like this lady on the screen, I think she will come to regret this. And I don't think Bashar al-Assad has won very many friends with his exit, but I think the days of his administration of Syria will soon be ruefully missed by by the potential alternatives.
Yeah, I have a feeling that it's going to be, as you said, a repeat of the Iran revolution in '79, where people were very happy to see the Shah being ousted, but didn't really understand what was in store for them under the theocratic leadership of the Ayatollahs. It seems like almost like a repeat, and it's kind of, when they say the adage that, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, and this looks exactly what we're seeing here.
Well, in terms of just to having a quick look at what state building has been going on, is effectively most of the old Ba'athist institutions seem to have more or less been taken over by Sunni radical ministers. So the new Minister of Justice, if you've seen a picture of him, you would be like, this is like some kind of inbred from a Bangladeshi community in like East London kind of thing. Full scraggly beard, full Islamic dress. This is the new Minister of Justice. And the first thing he says is we are going to implement Sharia law as the basis of the national legal code. All the female judges have been effectively, as of today, kicked out of their roles. And all cases are now assigned to male judges. So women have effectively, I'm not trying to come across as like, progressive feminist or anything here, but if you've got, I don't think women should be removed from society, and I don't think this is a good movement to establish like an Islamic theocracy. The new prime minister was an open militant for al-Nusra Front. Of course, I'm sure we've all been bombarded with al-Julani's past, because Western media, as far as I could tell from the little I've watched of it over the past couple of weeks, is just full of glowing praise about this reformed jihadist who apparently is going to institute a brilliant liberal democracy.
I should add, it's kind of interesting how they've made him a plucky multiculturalist who is very much into diversity, where if you actually, anybody can look at this right now, the Twitter handle for the American Syria embassy, the embassy for the
has a $10 million reward for
$10 million reward for him, and they haven't even had the good sense to take that down, describing him as a terrorist. And now he's a plucky guy on our side who just loves diversity and LGBTQ.
CNN does an interview with a man who probably himself has beheaded people in the recent past. He's probably literally himself has probably cut the head off another living human being, because in his mind, it was religiously ordained for him to do that. CNN does an interview with him, and puts his preferred pronouns in the caption. It's like the glazing that is being done on this man it's astounding. But so this is a man who has strong links, probably killed American soldiers in Iraq as well during the Iraqi insurgency. He was very involved with Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the proto-Islamic State whenever it was active in Iraq. So, he has that background. He's effectively like the new national leader. So that's the kind of consolidation of what the state is already, the de facto state. Of course, you have different competing groups. You have the Turkish aligned Syrian National Army in the north. You have these American aligned Free Syrian Army in the south. How they're all going to reconcile themselves. But nonetheless, Hayat al-Sham is leading the show for all intents and purposes. It's the kind of the basis of this would-be state in the making. So the indications that this is going to become like a plucky new democracy in the Middle East isn't exactly good. So, best case scenario, this becomes like an Islamic democracy kind of thing. Very slim chances of that. Worst case scenario, it devolves into like probably even worse than like a Taliban-esque theocratic dictatorship that then, because of the Israeli actions and the ongoing, like the civil war isn't over, it's still going on. They're fighting the Kurds in the east. That's still to be seen, however it goes. But what if so both Hayat al-Sham and the Syrian National Army are effectively Turkish proxies. The Syrian National Army are puppets, essentially, of Ankara. They're openly fly the Turkish flag, openly sing the praises of Erdogan. They are Turks by an arm of the Turkish state by any other name. Hayat al-Sham is a bit more nuanced. Yes, they were very closely aligned to the Turks. They were armed and supported by the Turks, but they are, at the end of the day, ultimately Sunni extremists, Salafists in their core. So whenever the common interests of Ankara and Hayat al-Sham in Syria start to diverge, does this mean that the Syrian National Army and Hayat al-Sham might start fighting each other? Could the country effectively just devolve into complete anarchy as anyone and everyone starts to fight each other? Like, that's the worst case scenario I'm looking at, because the other aspect of this is, up until about a week ago, there was nominally 250,000 at the upper end, 100,000 Syrian soldiers. These are people who, whether they actually existed or not, but nonetheless, there were tens of thousands, potentially a couple 100,000 Syrian soldiers, people who were loyal to the Bashar al-Assad estate, under arms in the Syrian army or under various pro-government militias, predominantly the National Defense Forces. These people haven't gone away. Some of them have fled abroad. Some of them have kind of been captured. But a lot of these people, during the collapse, dissolved and went back to their homes. They're still out there. They took their weapons with them. So if the persecution of the minorities gets too bad, as I've started to see inclinations that there might be happening, that there might be a movement amongst the Alawites to resurrect the NDF, or the Christians potentially to start forming militias, like these people could reemerge and start fighting as well. So it's astounding to me that there's this idea that this is a good thing that's happened in Syria. And the idea that the Syrian refugees are going to be going back, they're not going to go back.
No, they're not going to be going back.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a new helping of Syrian refugees heading toward the welfare states of Western Europe. I think
hopefully, in my mind, as I would actually be amenable to the idea that maybe Christians and Alawites should be
but
open.
but they won't do it in that fashion.
Yeah, I know they won't do that in that fashion. But then again, I'm of the mindset that the people who really need the help in this situation are the Christians and the Alawites.
But they would never do that in Western society.
I know they wouldn't, but at the same time, I'm also of the mindset, but are we kind of helping? This is kind of the argument as why doesn't like the other Arab states taking all the Palestinians? Well, if you do that, you do the work for the Israelis. You are facilitating the ethnic cleansing of these lands. So that's kind of my other aspect of it. The other aspect is, again, I'm coming back to this because I don't think people are really, like, the Russians are afraid to properly call them out for this. And because they're a NATO member and stuff, you can't really, the Americans can't openly criticize them for it. But like, I do think this is just the sheer audacity and self-centeredness of the Turks in this really has to be brought into light. This is what's happened in Syria is no less than Erdogan's machinations. This is the Turkish state acting in the most brutal and ruthless fashion to propagate its own interests. We've seen them effectively assist the Azeris in destroying Armenian Karabakh. And potentially, there's rumors that there might be another invasion of Armenia in the days to come. We've seen them effectively destroy Syria. One aspect of this is the Turks trying to displace the Russians to try and push out and absorb Russian influence in these regions. But also another aspect of this is, on one hand, the Turks will take in millions of Syrian refugees and then openly push them into Europe whenever they want to push concessions from the EU and Western powers. So they'll use these refugees as like a bargaining chip and as a sort of demographic weapon against Western Europe. But on the other hand,
as they have in the past.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to go in too much because you are resident in Turkey at the moment, Felix. So I don't want you to get a knock on the door. As it were,
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. With that said, there's a couple of things I should answer. I'd like to just move it into answering a few questions people have been asking that I thought, and you guys can jump in. One of the reasons people are, it's a silly question. Why is my image black and white? Well, the reason why is currently I am in a hotel room. And it has absolutely, utterly bad light. And when I turned it on and looked at myself, I was yellow as Big Bird from the Muppets or Sesame Street. And you can also see there's a kind of rolling sensation. And the only thing that made it, I think, even at least visually palatable was making it black and white. And as you were saying, I am in Turkey. I should probably point that out. Interestingly enough, I am currently right here, because people
here we go. He's going to dox himself right down.
I'm not doxing myself. It's a big city. I think there's like 12 million people or something.
Hope not. Hey, we know you're in chat. Get ready. He's about to reveal the exact address.
Exactly. There we are. Okay. Oh, it's going into whatever. So I'm around here. So the ancient city of Istanbul it goes along this line right here on the Golden Horn, and a little bit over here on the Galatasaray part. I'm in the modern city, which is just above here in Taksim. That's where I am right now, and that's why I'm in this weird hotel room and why it looks so strange and whatnot. So we had a question from a Mr. Anderson, and he asked, and this is a very good question, is what about the crisis going on in Iran and it's basically being emasculated by the Israelis through the destruction of the Syrian state? And what was for a very long time a client state of Iran. And it's sort of, I guess the idea is that, how do you see this as being detrimental to Iran's position in the region, showing that they're not even able to help their client states survive an Israeli onslaught?
As I was kind of alluding to, it's just like a strategic defeat for Iran. I think Iran had pretensions of geopolitical influence that it couldn't really sustain. It is not capable and was not capable of waging war against Israel. This idea that you could build up Hamas and Hezbollah to a state where they could militarily compete against Israel to any effective degree, I always think that was probably a bit more optimistic than it needs to be. So I think this is kind of the collapse of Iranian influence. I've seen some pretensions that Muqtada al-Sadr, a long-time foreign sort of in Iran. He's a Shia cleric in Iraq. If people can remember back to the Iraq War, he was a big figure, especially in the south and amongst the Shia community in Iraq. He's sort of more of a nationally Iraqi-minded Shia cleric. There's some indications that he's starting to maybe sort of become a bit more active to push out the pro-Iranian Shia elements in Iraq. So his kind of worldview is that the heart of Shia Islam is in Iraq, because that's where the Battle of Karbala was, is where Hussein died and the likes of that. So he's kind of trying to create like a division in the Shia world, sitting there saying, well, the Iranians are not Arabs.
And they're very clear on that point. I should note that at least in North America, after the 1979 uprising and revolution, it's kind of interesting that in North America, you'll find a lot of Iranians don't even like being called Iranians. They call themselves Persians.
Yeah.
And that kind of confused me when I was younger. I mean, I couldn't sort of put the two and two together, but what it was they didn't even want to be called Iranians. They wanted to be called Persians, because I am assuming they wanted to be associated with the thousands of year old high culture of the Persian Empire.
Yeah. So
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just to finish this up, because I'm sure George would have a good take on this, but like my personal view is I think Iran is going to be, it's extremely hobbled by this, if not handicapped. I think probably what the next decade will be Iran trying to maintain influence in Iraq, depending on what this, like I say, Muqtada al-Sadr and the people he sort of leads that movement seems to be pushing for, trying to push out the Iranians and trying to establish Iraq as like the, we are the Arab Shia power. We are the heart of the Shia world, like I say, because the Battle of Karbala, the death of Hussein happened in Iraq, and it's where the big shrines are. And Iranians aren't Arabs. I don't think quite a lot of people understand that there is.
Yeah, they're not, and they're very, very clear on not wanting to be associated with them.
There is so like the Sunnis who fought in Syria and stuff would refer to the Iranians as like Safavids, which is an old Iranian dynasty, and it goes back, but they are separate people. So the Iranians are probably going to be trying to rebuild. If anything, I think this has probably emphasized the Iranian desire to have a nuclear bomb a lot more, but then it's also opened up the aspects for the Israelis to openly attack the Iranians to prevent that a lot more. So my sort of conception of it is the best thing that Iran could probably do would be just recuse itself from international affairs, try and maintain what influence it has in Iraq and Yemen, but just say, look, we've kind of lost this one. We need to go back and sort ourselves out internally. Our economy's a shambles. If we have a bigger economy, a more efficient economy, maybe we can start to get a bit more ambitious about what we can actually fund and sustain internationally. Because I think the Iranians have been dealt a strategic blow, because it's this myopic mindset by the Iranians to just constantly poke at Israel. Everything has to be done about this great battle with Israel. Well, the problem is you're not going to win this battle with Israel, at least not anytime soon. And to a large degree, it seemed this is part of why what happened in Syria happened, is the Iranian machinations and constantly using Syria as this place to attack Israel and to fund support Hezbollah undermined the Bashar al-Assad government to a large degree, because the Israelis were constantly bombing Iranian assets in Syria. Which is in the south on the Golan, the old Golan line, the separation line, which used to be manned by Syrian soldiers. Whenever the Russians came into Syria, they ended up taking control of that. And a large frustration, which Russia particularly had in Syria, was with the Iranians. Like, I guess the best term would be to use is tar wrangle. Is like the Russians felt they were constantly trying to tar wrangle the Iranians in Syria to tell them, like, stop attacking Israel, stop pissing off Israel. We are in Syria to fight and secure the regime in Syria. This is what our main goal is here. We have to defeat like the rebels in Idlib and sort that out and stabilize Bashar al-Assad's government. Whereas the Iranian mindset was, no, Syria is the stepping stone to attack Israel. And apparently that was like a big source of frustration between the Russians and the Iranians, which also filtered through into the government. So like Mahar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's brother, if I'm remembering this correctly, I believe that he was very pro-Iranian, but like a lot of senior figures within the Syrian military itself were very pro-Russian, because they viewed the Russians as like trying to do a good thing in Syria for the benefit of the Syrians, whereas they kind of viewed like the Iranian influence in Syria, like, yeah, thank you for sending Hezbollah in to fight for us and all this kind of stuff, but like, our country's shattered. We're trying to rebuild it. Can you stop trying to wage war against Israel via our country while it's in ruins, kind of thing? So sorry if that went over. I am aware I've kind of had quite a big spiel, but just a lot of stuff to get out. Been obsessed with this the past couple of weeks. So with that, I'm sure George would have a great insight into sort of Iran, Iraq, and Syria.
Okay, before he does that, I'd just like to, there's a comment. Assad was not a jihadist, schooled in the U.S., wore $5,000 Armani suits and $20K Rolex watches. Now the true believers will destroy it. And there's another comment here from Glow in the Dark. I hope the Christians in Syria can find a place to be safe. We spend billions on Kurds, but we can't protect the Christians. Sad for a supposed Christian or secular non-partisan nation like the United States. I completely agree. George, do you have anything to sort of add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. I mean, I've been on other shows. I've been on with, I'll be on with Stu Turley of Energy Newsbeat tomorrow. I was on with Constant Constantine Martelli, that show's coming out, and with Ann Vandersteel a couple of days ago on X. So all my other, strategic predictions will be on those shows, whatever, because we're not going to cover a lot of them today. But one thing I wanted to note, I was just jotting down notes while Michael was talking, was after the U.S. Got rid of Saddam Hussein, then people realized, because he's a Ba'athist, just like Assad. They're both Ba'athists. They got rid of the bulwark between the theocratic government of Iran and the Sunni fundamentalists. And General Clark was talking about in 2007, 2011. The United States had to stay in Iraq because if the United States exited Iraq too soon, then how does Saudi Arabia push back against the Shia fundamentalists and break up the northern part of the Shia crescent? He says, well, if they need somebody to fight, they would arm, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the people that would be willing to fight. So then what has just occurred is we took, the other half of that bulwark to that was in between the Shia fundamentalists and the Sunni fundamentalists was Bashar Assad. So we not only committed that mistake once, we came back and did it again. So I don't see it getting better from that angle. Of course, the big downfall that we covered in way past videos was Assad and Saddam Hussein wanted to build their own pipelines to Turkey and to Europe, and they made the cardinal sin of wanting to exit the petrodollar and trade directly in euros. Well, they had their countries invaded. Bashar al-Assad's second cardinal sin was he was offered the Qataris did want to move their pipeline through Syria because Iraq was already destabilized and the Iranians could just blow it up. And then he declined letting that pipeline go through. And then it wasn't long after that Al-Qaeda in Iraq somehow metastasized into ISIS and arms started flooding in. Before I was discussing all those logistical supply steps, I won't go through it again, that it takes to take crude oil, sell it on the open market and brings ammo back. That takes a lot of state actor complicities to make that happen, with the money going through, the financial center of Dubai. Everybody in the region pretty much knows that and Doha. So I think, from that angle, the United States repeated a second mistake again. Of course, it's all about a lot of it for the superpowers level, the grand strategic level is oil and natural gas pipelines. Then, I forget the guy's name, but he wrote a guy in Beirut back in 2015 was talking about what's going to happen if ISIS at al-Nusra front join forces and push the Alawite through Damascus. He said their next move would be to keep on pushing them straight through Beirut and push the Alawite out to the sea. It's about 111 kilometers between Damascus and Beirut. I was looking, I want to see what occurs on that front. Of course, that is why the United States and Israel have just been pounding the arms depots and knocking out airplanes, tanks, any kind of armored assets whatsoever. So again, it would be, the wild card here as well. The United States is clearly, following the Brzezinski, Wolfowitz, Speakman plan of destabilizing the whole region. Well, two can play in that game. Iran or China just has to dump off a boatload of weapons in Latakia or Tartus, and just keep that game going. As far as Iran goes, the next play of the neocons is if people just Google a map of the ethnic regions of Iran, you can already see what they're doing. The American armored vehicles have been in Baluchistan, I want to say, for over a year now, maybe almost 2 years now. Caspian Sea report did focused on that, but of course it's out on Telegram. So clearly the weapon we left behind went to Iran, and the piles of cash that are for humanitarian assistance that have been going into HKIA since we left. That's clearly to support the violent extremist organizations I'll just take a guess, because the pallets of cash landed in Kaya, and then these armored vehicles of the United States ended up in Baluchistan. There's the riots in Gwadar port started occurring, the assassination of Chinese engineer and KPK in northern Pakistan and Jammu and Kashmir. So you start to see a lot of correlations of different VEO activities in that area. I kind of expect the Russians to do the same thing, because this has been going back. The great game of Britain trying to stop Russia from getting any warm water ports has been going on in one fashion or another for 300 years now.
Yeah.
It's going to intensify over the oil and gas pipelines. But I'm expecting the focus is a calculated focus to shift resources to destabilize. If the neocons are trying to destabilize Iran, then the land power counter movement would be to keep Iran stabilized. They don't have to be best ideological friends. They're just geostrategic allies in this case. So in that case, I would expect the Russian emphasis to shift to supplying Iran with IADs, integrated air defense systems, S-400s and 300s. The United States used to fly over Iran with impunity. In the old days, I think that's changed. They moved the S-300s there several years back. I forget. Well, no, not that long. 2 or 3 years ago. No, 2 years ago, I'll say.
They've also, just to add to that, the Russians have also secured contracts to supply the Iranians with Su-34s. So that's going to be a massive update in their air defense and strike capabilities.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different flights that have been going over Iran with impunity for years. Military flights I'm talking about, which is, I don't know, in a way, it's not that big of a deal. It's more antagonistic because, you have commercial flights that go over there like, hundreds a day. I've been back and forth across Iran, probably 24 times in going different directions. So, yeah, I think it's going to shift there because the Israelis have been supporting Aliyev with military weapons against the Armenians, and also to support the Azeris in the Tabriz area of Iran. So I think the neocon movement is to use the Azeris and the Kurds. Also, the Western agencies moved the MEK out of Iran and harbored them in northern Iraq for a while.
Oh, the communists. Yeah. Just for people who are not aware, it's an old communist party that used to be quite influential in the early revolution.
Yeah, so they've ended up in the past couple of years back in northern Iraq. So they're supported. That's not by accident. Let me put it that way. So I think the emphasis is going to go to destabilizing Iraq, and I think Putin and Assad made a calculated refocus of resources. So if they're gonna abandon Syria on one side of Eurasia, look for the corresponding effort on the other side of Eurasia. The play for those practice invasions of Taiwan, I don't really think the joint force exercises by China. I mean, the fake practice invasions of surrounding Taiwan. I think that's more to stress the fact that, well, if the sea powers are going to use the Malacca Strait to cut China off of oil and natural gas shipments and suffocate their economy, Well, they moved into with the 9-line and 10-line and building those fake islands in the South China Sea, are saying that, well, if we get cut off oil or gas, then Philippines, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan are going to get cut off from oil and gas from the Middle East and Africa. The play there is to get South Korea and Japan to go ahead and finish those pipeline plans and buy more oil and gas from Russia and exit to petrodollar. And again, I said it's the diplomatic pressure on stopping those pipeline projects was intense. But yeah, I also, and the assassination of a Shinzo Abe is too coincidental. So I'm expecting the pressure to increase in by China to chase the first island chain allies of the United States to buying more oil and gas and pay in. Well, now they have to pay in rubles. So I'm expecting the pressure to shift, around Eurasia.
Let me just see. We had a couple more questions here. Well, one of the questions was directed toward me, and it was it's completely not associated with this. I just want to break it up a little bit. People were asking me, why on earth would I be in Turkey? That's a good question. One thing is I actually lived here a number of years ago in Istanbul, and I actually kind of like it here. People have this idea that the entire Middle East is somewhat of, roaming camels and people wearing hijabs or, chadors or burqas, but it's actually quite secular and modern, at least here in Istanbul. Let me just bring up this map.
Also, keeping some of the oldest churches are up and down Istiklal Street there.
Oh yeah, well that's the thing. I'm going to be going.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to midnight mass at a church. It's a Latin church just here. I'll just show you guys if this works. For some reason, Google Earth has not been working well in this city, and that kind of frightens me a little bit. So this is basically Taksim Square. This is the main hub now in the city. And if we follow this down here, I believe, yes, here it is. I think it's this one. The only thing that does worry me somewhat is that going to churches, it's not working there. Here, this is it, Church of St. Anthony.
Well, while you're looking for that, just a quick comment. Yeah. Have you noticed have you seen many of the refugees in Syria in there? Because it was a comment I was going to add to my little spiel on Turkey is their ruthlessness is another aspect why I think Erdogan engineered this in Syria, is with the idea of just physically forcibly
removing them,
expelling them back to to Syria.
Yeah, that's actually something that should be brought up. Here in Turkey, the tension and the tolerance of these Syrians is coming to an end. The cultural difference between the two and the ability for them to live together in the same space is just not working out. Turks
again,
very much just like the Syrian population within the country. And I wouldn't be surprised if Erdogan doesn't just carve out a piece of northern Syria just to place these people into it and call it a safe zone. And whether it be Assad's gone. So, I mean, the entire argument for why they had to leave has been, it's evaporated. And now with the ability to just take chunks of land, which is looking like what Israel's doing, I wouldn't be surprised if Turkey doesn't do a little bit. That they just try and expel these people, at least a lot of them. They'll probably retain some that they can use, as you said previously, for blackmail purposes in the West. And at any time when Western Europe doesn't provide that which Turkey demands, this can be solved. This is, I was just going to say very quickly.
Well, also the big Arab areas are on the other side of
on the Bosphorus. That would be in Üsküdar, and I'll show that in a minute. So this is the main drag. This is where I'm staying, and it's also very cheap. And they have a lot of these churches, and it's kind of interesting. here you'll see in the picture that there's only one police car there. Usually there's several, and just protecting all of the churches in the city with militarized police and machine guns, which is really quite unfortunate. But actually the truth of the matter. But yeah, as you said, most of the Arab, I think what it is the Arab and the more radical portions of the Islamists here in Turkey, when they do come to the city, you'll have the old town, the old city, which is right here. This is the old Roman Byzantine city, the
Constantinople, basically.
This is the old Constantinople here, the Golden Horn. Across the rivers here that's Galatasaray, and that was pretty much created in the aftermath of the Latin Crusades of the first and second.
The old Genoese place, isn't it?
Yeah. These are Genoese, and also there's also Venetian. So one of the more famous buildings in Istanbul is the Galata Tower, and that was built by Venetian Crusaders after they sacked the city, I think in 1209, somewhere like that.
1207.
1207.
Third Crusade, yeah.
So what you have here is on this side. So this is the European side, just for people to understand. And you go up through here. This is the Sea of Marmara. This is the Black Sea up here. And so it's built. The city's built on they call it two continents. Down here, the Sea of Marmara empties out into the Aegean Sea, and this is actually where the Battle of Gallipoli was, because this is where they were trying to control the Dardanelles Straits here in order to do it. So, I mean, this is completely not associated with what we're talking about. But getting back to Istanbul proper, European side, Asian side, and most of the Arabs and a lot of the more radical and fundamentalist parts of Istanbul live in this part here, Üsküdar. And it's quite interesting because I was just going to say, quite interestingly, in the area I'm staying in, I don't want to be crude, but the amount of attractive women in this city absolutely blows cities like London and Paris and Berlin away. And part of the reason is there's very few. This feels much more like a modern secular city than London, Paris, and Berlin do now, because of the population shifts that have occurred there. And so what is interesting, though, is on the European side, you'll find lots of beautiful women wearing very scantily clad attire, whereas on the other side, you'll see fully draped in black cloth, face masked Muslim women rocking around on the other side. But it's all very neighborhooded. So it's Üsküdar is quite like that, but just south of that is Kadıköy and Moda, and it's not like that at all. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, just like Iranians and Arabs are very different people, just because they're all Sunni Muslim. Turks and Arabs definitely are not anything alike.
Oh, absolutely not. And the Turks would be quite offended if you said something along those lines, So, yeah. Let me see. I think we've been going for about 2 hours now. I think, is there anything else you guys want to, because I think we could go on for hours and hours and hours here,
yeah.
but I think 2 hours we've been going over 2 hours, just a little bit over 2 hours. I'm thinking maybe we might want to call it a night. At least for me, it's coming on 2:30 a.m. So is there anything you wanted to sort of add to our conversation? And perhaps we could revisit this in the next couple of days and just add, a sequel to this particular episode.
Yeah, I guess my only take here would be that it's very, very unfortunate what's happened. It's kind of like there's a good comment. If anyone remembers the old song that was very prevalent on Poll in 4chan back in the day, God, Syria, al-Bashar, that song, the meme song that went about. Watching that now kind of feels like watching your parents go through a divorce. In a roundabout way. Pretty sure a lot of people in here, and certainly myself, during the mid-2000s, like Syria dominated the news. It was like the big international news story, far more than Afghanistan or anything. In many ways, the conflict in Syria has affected all of us, really, be it through terrorism, be it via the refugee crisis, be it through the rise of Russia and Iran, and then I guess the the fall of Russia and Iran in the region, the ramifications of what's happened in Syria since 2011 in a roundabout way has probably affected most of us. It's kind of very depressing to kind of see the resolution end in the way it has. And I guess my only thing is just for people who do, just pray for the Christians and the Alawites and the minorities in Syria. Genuinely, especially if you happen to know any policymakers or anything, try and lobby them in their behalf, because these are people without a voice. They are without their protectors. There's no one there calling out for them. There's no one there to defend them. So look up the channels and social media accounts of Christians and Alawites and stuff in Syria. Do retweet and support them and try and give them a voice that they don't have, while essentially atrocities are being committed against them. People need to know what is being done to these people.
I agree. One last question that it's been asked several times by Bunker Housing, and he's asking, he's curious of how is there any possibility for what's happened to backfire on Israel and Turkey? Do you guys see?
Oh, immensely.
Can you tell us a little about it, George?
Well, like I just said, if the Russians start massively funding HTS, then it's okay. The black flag.
Can you define HTS for our audience, please?
Yeah, Hot Tahrir Sham. Yeah, it's an offshoot of Al Qaeda. Their leaders are originally allied to Ayman Zawahiri. He was in on the Sadat assassination in 1981. And then he started Al Qaeda with the Bin Laden, well, Osama bin Laden, but it's most of the Bin Laden family, and the Sunni Wahhabists. They're the ones that really pushed the House of Saud to fund the radical mosques all over the world. Of course, Osama bin Laden himself went to Pakistan to be with the Pashtun for the Abrahamic reasons. So, to them, what I was talking about in the Black Flags of the Khorasan video, if people Google that on YouTube and watch some of those videos, try to go to the ones that are 10 or 11 years old, because they talked about how are they gonna move across from the Khorasan and then control north of Israel and then attack Israel from the north. Well, they already were talking about. They were very, very happy with the fall of Afghanistan, because now they're like, okay, we got the first part done. Now how is the second part done? And the imams out of Pakistan that say it in English were saying, well, Allah is going to find a way, and Rome's going to create the circumstances under which this occurs. So that's occurred. Sunni Islam is now going to see this as the sign to rally around Jilani. So there's going to be a tremendous push in the Sunni fundamentalist world to make that happen. So I was talking about the Las Vegas shooting. That occurred. I can't remember really what year that was, but when Trump took office, his first trip out of the country was straight to Riyadh. He leaves Riyadh within 2 weeks. Mohammed bin Salman rounds up 165 of his cousins in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh, executes many of them. So it wasn't a big guess that what Trump delivered was the voice transcripts of who he's of which Arab tribes in Saudi Arabia are actually actively trying to overthrow the House of Saud in general, and Mohammed bin Salman in particular. The second thing that, then a couple of weeks after that, the Mohammed bin Salman put the big sanctions on Doha because of the funding of the fundamentalist groups. So this is the fact that Jilani now is a caliph flying the black flag of Al Qaeda. Well, they'll have the white flag and the black flag. The white flag will give people a period to
Is someone
submit to
hammering?
Israel. Yeah. So
George had a domestic issue today with his house.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I think there's some fixing going on behind him.
So anyway, the white flag of Islam gives everybody a period of time to convert to Islam and submit. Then the black flag will go up. So in the Sunni Islamic world, they'll be looking for these signs. The Western media is going to report none of this. Keep in mind.
Can you repeat that, George? Because I think it's very important. The white flag and the black flag.
Yeah, the white flag gives a period for the non-believers to convert to Sunni Islam. And then the black flag will mean that is over, and then Sharia law will be put into effect in full force. So the fact that these flags are being raised inside Syria is going to then rally all people from Islam. Actually, Shia and Sunni are supposed to rally to the Caliph, which is now going to be Jelani. It looks like he's lying low. I mean, he did the whole CNN, whitewash, this past week with Clarissa Ward. Anyway, I will expect the Sunni Shias to actually push to attack Israel. Not right away, of course. It's going to take time. They're going to wait till their timing is right. So I'm looking for the resupplies to come in to Latakia. And like what I mentioned before, some people were speculating, Russia was going to flee those bases. Well, they haven't. So to me, that indicates they've already worked it out with the GCC countries to actually resupply them and then turn the tables on Israel. Or they don't even need to do that. The Arab oil sheiks have their own ammunition factories. They have their own banks. They have their own ocean-going shipping companies. They don't need anybody else's help. They don't need anybody else's permission. If you look at the funding and financing of Al-Qaeda over the years, they obviously have every J section function or S section function that a nation state military has. So who has that kind of capability? You're talking about the MBA and PhD economic analysts for those Arab multinational corporations. So I'm expecting them to be a factor. And yeah, most people don't even realize that even exists. But it's obviously a thing because they were getting weapons in and out a day to fund a $10 million a day war in Syria for, since 2012.
Don't know. I think I kind of disagree with points on that. I don't think Russian. Just my quick take. I don't think I think the status of the base at Khamin and in Tartus that's still up in the air. There's signs that the Russians are slowly winding down their operations there. From my understanding, is they've been given 75 days leeway before the serious negotiations about what happens if they have to go or if they stay. So, and also. They're flying drones over the base, literally right over the base at the moment and filming it and putting that footage up online, which obviously isn't very good for the Russians. So I wouldn't be surprised if some Ukrainian operators were to go in there with drones and cause some trouble in the meantime. But I think the Russians, if they do manage to do some kind of deal where they hold on to the bases, good for them. But I don't think the Russians they've never been of the mindset to get involved in a conflict with Israel. That's why the Russian soldiers were on the border with the Golan. That's why the Russians very rarely, only in very select circumstances, did they fire air defense systems against Israeli aircraft bombing Damascus. And even then, it was only ever seen to shoot down the missiles, not the jets themselves. I don't think the Russians are of any mindset after this to keep a ongoing commitment in the Middle East, especially with what's going on in Ukraine. I think this is Moscow trying to save face over what it can and where it can. But I think the Russians are probably looking for basing options, probably in Egypt, maybe Algeria, maybe in that friendly regime in Eastern Libya. In terms of like funding HTS, I think that would be a very bad idea for Moscow, and I don't think they'd ever touch that, because a lot of people who fought for HTS and are in their orbit are Chechens. They are these Central Asians who, whenever the time comes, like I say, some of these Chechen guys were fighting in Ukraine as of this summer. Now that the fighting in Syria is over, they're probably going to go back to Ukraine, or other ones are probably going to go back to Chechnya. There's a significant group of Russian-speaking fighters who have been active in Syria, and I think Moscow is pretty terrified of these people. They do not want these people to come back into, let alone Russia, Central Asia, to start causing havoc there. So I don't think Russia is going to be of the mindset of legitimizing, let alone arming HTS under any circumstances, especially while they maintain connections with these Chechen and Central Asian or Russian-speaking fighters. That's just my personal 2 cents over what I've seen over the past couple.
Yeah.
Weeks.
It doesn't change anything I said, because whoever they leave the bases to can bring the weapons in. It doesn't change anything.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were saying that the Russians were like going to be shipping in like tanks and stuff to the Hayat al-Sham. Sorry.
See, but I think let me put it this way: weapons show up. Somebody, when you're doing covert operations, you don't leave the evidence to pin it on yourself. You frame somebody else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everybody's using so many different cutouts that they're just going to show up, because they've just been showing up for over 12 years now. So that's why I'm saying there's nothing you said. You could be 100% right, or at least on the surface, because you're dealing with covert versus overt operations. So, I'm not going to disagree with anything you said. But HTS, the Black Flag or the Khorasan videos, their goal is to attack Israel and bring back the Mahdi. That's the whole purpose of the foreign fighters operating out of Faizabad in northern Afghanistan and Dur in northern Pakistan.
Yeah.
And these Chechens move around. They're very ideologically motivated, and they're especially funded since the Grand Mosque seizure event.
Well, the thing on the specific Israeli angle is, if there is like attacks that start against Israel, I would expect it to be like I've said, these groups that are attacking and predating on the Alawites and Christians, these sort of semi-independent groups, because by all accounts, it seems that the Jolanis, they aren't even really acknowledging that it's happening at all, this Israeli invasion in the south, or the bombing that's been going on for days now, where Israel is bombing pretty much anything and everything. You'll be lucky to see any of Jolani's groups or coalitions actually even mention this, let alone saying they'll fight against it. If, like I was saying in my spiel, they're more interested in pointing out that they don't like the Shia, as opposed to like, we don't like we're going to fight the Israelis. And there's this bizarre dichotomy amongst Sunnis and Shias, where they're both trying to call out each other for like being the bigger puppet of Israel, or like Bashar al-Assad was actually an Israeli agent the entire time. Look at this proof of these documents we've found, or like Jolani is actually an Israeli agent because he's from the Golan and he's wearing this apparently Israeli. It's like, they're both agreeing like Israel's the enemy, but I mean, Israel's invading and they're just sitting back and like, sorry, we just can't deal with this right now. It's like, guys, I don't think, like I say, I think Israel is probably the most secure it has ever been. Complete strategic victory. If this is the opposition that's going to take the place of like Bashar al-Assad, and it's just been completely militarily degraded beyond like a couple of tanks and light arms that haven't been bombed. If people are expecting like there's going to be this great Muslim uprising against Israel, is going to wipe it off the face of the earth, sorry guys, it's not going to happen. Israel's the most safe that it's been probably in its entire existence as a state as a result of this. I don't see how, especially after the past week of Israeli bombings destroying literally everything that isn't like a person, like you couldn't carry like a small arm. I don't see how any future Syrian state could present any more of a threat than Hezbollah did towards Israel. And look at what's happened to Hezbollah in the past few months.
Yeah. See, I mean, and there's a lot of reason for that because, again, the United States is going to strangle them economically.
Yeah.
Okay, because the United States is still going to have the oil fields. The agricultural land is still going to be occupied by Turkey. So then you get to the point where, you know, the economy still doesn't really improve.
Yeah. And not only that, is all the bombing
so-
the Israelis have been doing inherently makes an already unstable
Yeah,
proto-state more unstable, because now you've taken away any chance for it to project. Like, how the reason Bashar al-Assad was able to retake most of the country was because he had heavy advanced weapons. And now
Right,
the Israelis have effectively
then you
destroyed
get-
that.
Okay, but say you take that Syrian girl, she comes back and finds out, you know, in the year or two, whatever, the economy still isn't growing because it's still being strangled because now, you know, the surrounding powers don't want to empower HTS. Now they have to strangle it almost as much as they've strangled Assad. Maybe they'll ease up a little bit, but it's not going to be, when you get something that's unstable like that, it's a perpetual problem.
Yeah. It's easier to destroy a country than to rebuild it.
Right. So then, you know, the Sunni extremists are not going to be happy with them being strangled like that, and it's going to be another source of instability.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to wrap it up here. I just have one last thing to show, and it's related to a certain extent. And I've been seeing this across Europe. I've been seeing this across Europe that there have been migrants, refugees, and Muslims that have been going through Christmas markets across the continent. And in doing so, they've been shouting, I'll just read this here. Islamists go through a Christmas market and start reciting the same prayer that Muhammad's army recited when they invaded Mecca and drove out the pre-Islamic population. And I've been seeing this across Europe. This is just one version of it. I've seen them from above. It seems almost coordinated to me. And it's happened since the fall of the Assad government. I'll just play this really quickly for you guys.
الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله.
Oh, hold on a second. You guys getting the sound on that?
I'm getting the audio, yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure because I turned off the audio a couple of minutes ago. All right.
لا إله إلا الله والنبي رسول الله والنبي رسول الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر لا
And I guess this is the thing. It seems, given the vast majority of the millions of migrants that arrived in Europe since 2016, since the opening of the border by Angela Merkel and her very famous refrain of "Wir schaffen das," we can do this. And the fact, again, that almost invariably 80-90% of the people that arrived were military age young men. Do you think that some of this boisterous challenging on the streets across Europe by young Muslim men asserting the dominance of Islam in public spaces is attributable to the win we have just seen by Islamists in Syria?
Oh yeah. I think George even referenced it. Like, this has been what's happened in Syria has been like a ISIS kind of broke the back as it sort of was for like Salafist jihadist Sunni groups, but this is just like reinvigorated it like 20-fold. You had the Taliban win in Afghanistan, which beat the Western Crusaders. You've now had this at the heart of the Middle East, which has beaten the Russians and the Russian Crusaders and the Safavids. I think this has been a massive shoot in the arm in morale and ambitions for Sunni extremists and Salafists the world over. This is why I think the Russians are especially concerned about these Chechens and stuff, and why I think places like Egypt, I think the Egyptian government should be very concerned about this. They have a large Muslim Brotherhood political contingent in their country. Of course, the current president is there only by the abilities of the military the state that put him in power. I think we're probably entering into another couple decades of out of control Sunni extremism and terrorism. Not that we ever really ended that as such, but just before we clip over this, I am seeing some news that apparently the Turkish army have begun crossing the border into Syria. So that's probably a large-scale operation against the Kurds that started.
It's begun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now the next conflict is going to be between Turks and the Americans, as far as
the Americans will betray the Kurds.
Yes, space deconfliction. So what's going to happen to the YPG?
Like I say, they've done it before. The Americans will betray the Kurds. They'll leave the Kurds on their own. They've done it before. It will happen again.
Well, we just did it in Afghanistan with the Uzbeks and Tajiks.
Yeah. So it looks like the Turks have begun military operations around the city of Kobani to evict the Kurds from there. Anyone who remembers the name of Kobani will probably understand why that's quite a depressing blow, but not atypical for the Turks.
All right, guys. We've kind of extended it to about 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. Anything, for example, you'd like to finish up with, and then perhaps give the audience somewhere where they can find you?
Oh, yeah, me. I'll be on. I'm doing my really more in-depth sea power encirclement versus land power logistical supply round integration presentations on Energy Newsbeat. So that's in conjunction with the Russian natural gas and global geopolitical realignment series that I'm doing. So that's energy and natural gas oriented, about pipelines and conflict areas, because that's where all the conflict areas are. Wherever there's pipelines, there's conflict.
Yeah, this is very important stuff, the pipelines things. Where can people find you, George?
Oh, on ravengeostrategic.com and on LinkedIn. Yeah, I got rid of my telegrams. I don't want to deal with people with pseudonyms anymore.
Okay.
If people want to contact me, they can contact me in the real names. Also on Patreon, I think it's the I haven't looked at it in so long, but I resurrected it recently. It's under what is my creator name on that? It's under oh wait, hold on a second. I think it's under unifiedbehavioraltheory.com. I mean on Patreon. Yeah, I just started to resurrect it. Yeah, it's Unified Behavioral Theory. I'm going to start posting that papers probably soon. I need to sync my different accounts, my website, my Patreon page.
Well, I don't know if you want to be coming on this show if you're trying to gear up a Patreon. I mean, myself, along with many others, was banned from that. I was actually, just a quick anecdote. It was at the beginning of the Ukraine-Russian invasion of the country, and there was a large protest in central Tokyo, and it was all probably 99% was just Ukrainians that were living in Tokyo at the time. And I was just talking to them. I interviewed them, and in my summation, part of the video that I made. I said something along the lines of one of the key things about Japan is that when you live in the country, what they do not tolerate is foreigners engaging in political action within their borders. And something as what people would think is their right to protest is considered political action if you're a foreigner, because it creates disharmony within the country or potential disharmony. And they won't deport you right away, but if they figure out who you are, and I'm sure they took photos of everybody that was there, that they would not renew visas of people that would want to stay. And Patreon threw me off for advocating for segregation. So,
or whatever.
Yeah, I know. You got to be careful with those guys. Michael, how about yourself? Do you got anything in conclusion or where people can find you?
Oh God, I wouldn't want to bore people with another hour long spiel. I'll just run straight into the self-shilling. So most of what I do, guys, I do on Telegram. So if Felix would be so kind as to throw that up there. So I'm on Telegram. I do most of my sort of shit posting on X. Not too sure what's happening with X because my reach seems to be very small for some reason. Just like only 10% of my followers, if they ever do see my posts, actually end up seeing them, which is a little bit frustrating. So but that aside, I do most of my stuff on Telegram, which hopefully Felix is going to throw up in chat.
I've just thrown it up on all platforms. That's
no
from
problem.
X
Thank you so much.
to D Live and other ones that we're on too as well.
I'll do a shill for my YouTube. I'm also getting back into the habit of doing some streams on YouTube. I've done 2 streams on Syria over the past couple of weeks. More to do with sort of like why we've seen the collapse of the Syrian Arab army, the potential what potentially caused that, and sort of how the sort of hollowing out of Syria since 2020 or since the civil war began. And geopolitical factors seem to have aligned to cause this particular set of circumstances that caused this spectacular collapse of the country and of the military, along with potentially some other more malicious, unseen actors as well. So I've just thrown the link to my YouTube in chat. So
yeah, I've thrown it up.
No problem. Thank you so much. So if you're interested in my stuff, that's where I mostly hang out. And thank you very much, Felix, for having me on again.
Oh, no, it's always a pleasure, guys. And I'd like to also thank very much the audience and for you guys being here. As always, it's been our pleasure. And for those of you who have sent out my email email me and I'll add you to the Discord. And with that said, let's see. Yeah, we're just going to close it up now. And I want to say thanks again, and we'll see you in the next stream. Bye for now, everybody.
See ya.
Hi, everyone. Just to let you know, I have some old favorites as well as new t-shirt designs on sale right now. Link to find them is in the description, and would like to thank you in advance, as it really does help the channel, as for years now, content like this has been put into an algorithmic black hole, as well as being demonetized. So thanks again, as well as I'm pretty